From the European Parliament here in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us tonight, and this is what we have for you on the menu. Expenses under wraps. MEPs will not have to reveal how they spend taxpayers' money. Not ruling out Remain. Will the UK's Labour Party take a political gamble on Brexit? Blame the messenger. Does the media bear responsibility for the rise of nationalism? Swedish confidence. The Prime Minister is ousted in a dramatic vote. And in tonight's Raw Moment, the biggest baby at the UN General Assembly. It's good to have you with us. Now it's time to meet the panel. We have, of course, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor here at Your News. Darren, which story do you like?
I think it does have to be MEPs. Expenses for an institution that bases itself on transparency and scrutiny and openness. I'm not entirely sure this has been a good day for them. And I do think it feeds into the worst perceptions of some of the European Union's enemies.
Exactly. And tonight we're also joined by David Hirschenhorn. He is a chief Brussels correspondent at Politico Europe. Or which one do you like?
I'm watching the UN General Assembly. Both Commission President Juncker and Council President Tusk are there. But we know there are a lot of crybabies on the world stage, including Donald Trump. So we'll see which one is the biggest. A
lot of things coming out of New York. And tonight we are joined also by Ernest Urtasun. He is a Green MEP from Spain. Ernest, which story are you watching?
Well, I'm following the Labour conference very closely. Labour not ruling out Remain anymore. I think that's a very important headline.
Important headline, especially for the EU. All right, we'll have more on all of those stories. But first, our top story. 751 MEPs. Hundreds of millions of euros in annual expenses. And according to a ruling today from the European Court of Justice, taxpayers, they're not entitled to know exactly how that money is spent. Now, the legal challenge was brought by journalists after Parliament denied access to documents about the money MEPs receive on top of their salaries. And that included general allowance, travel allowance, daily subsistence, and funds for staffing. Well, today in court, the court sided with the Parliament, refusing to provide access to documents. It says institutions must refuse access to a document where disclosure would undermine the protection of privacy and the integrity of the individual. So I'd like to go to you first, Ernest, as an MEP. Do you agree with this court ruling? Is it right or wrong?
I think it's completely wrong. We've been calling for transparency here in this House. I think a majority of MEPs, according to what we vote on these issues in plenary, are in favour of more transparency, and particularly on the general expenditures allowance, because this is 4,000 euros that come on top of our salary, and this is not an extra salary. This is money that needs to be used in a certain manner. There should be rules, and that is why from the Greens we have a policy that this money is kept in a separate bank account, that we keep receipts of what we how do we use that money.
If majority of MEPs want transparency, why is this the direction that the Parliament is taking?
Because so far the board of the Parliament has blocked any reform.
Do we know why?
And for transparency, that you should ask Mr. Tajani and his Vice President why that is the case. But I think for us it's very clear. It's very easy to put very simple rules as we have as Greens and the European Parliament. This money should be kept in a separate bank account. We need to keep receipts of everything that we spend, and there should be checks on these receipts. And of course, we're not asking the House to check on every single receipt, but you can do some controls on a certain percentage of the receipts randomly among different MEPs. This could be done very easily.
But you know what the question is going to be. What are you trying to hide? I mean, it's absurd that this is even in court, right? This is not about personal integrity or personal privacy. This is about public integrity. And if Europe wants to, for sure, get themselves more Donald Trumps elected, this is the way to go about it.
This is the
not
kind of
telling voters
behavior
how their money is used. It's a basic issue of trust between voters and government.
Absolutely. This is the kind of thing that fuels your skepticism, isn't it?
It fuels skepticism in general. Again, what are you hiding? Why is the leadership of the Parliament against this? MEPs could certainly disclose receipts. They could say we went for coffee with a constituent without saying who was drinking the coffee. There's nothing that's being dealt with here that is a national security issue. That stuff is handled in the capitals. So again, the question goes back to President Tajani and to the EPP, the dominant party in the Parliament. What are you hiding?
This discussion. Now, this case at the ECJ was originally brought by journalists. And Darren, you managed to speak to one of the journalists today who brought up the case. Right?
And when you look at some of the Tesa, just the figures involved in what you guys get and what you claim. I mean, you know, there's obviously the monthly salary of 8,611 euros. Then there's an office salary of before tax 24,164. That's for office staff. Then there's the daily subsistence when it comes to expenses, 307 euros per day. And then on top of that, that 4,000, which is not accountable at all. I mean, that's to most Europeans. That is way and beyond what they get. And to not have to properly explain what you're spending the money on, I think, is what people are outraged at. Now, the explanation, of course, from the Parliament is this about privacy and it's about work overload. But given you're weighing up those factors about transparency and balance and scrutiny in a democracy, that's probably quite important. But as you say, I did speak to one of those journalists, Anushka Delic. She is based in Ljubljana. And this is what she had to say. And I asked her, first of all, about how she thought today's ruling had gone.
I think it's disappointing, to say the least, or to be diplomatic. It's disappointing. And it's also worrisome. I think it comes at the worst possible time, given the state of the European Union today. I think that it really feeds into the hands of EU sentiments, or EU skeptics, because it is in effect saying that the members of the European Parliament are not to be scrutinized by the public because it's their private data. And if we say that this data is private, then that goes against all principles of public spending that any other EU institution or any other EU official has to adhere to, or, a democratic institution in any European member state.
I was just going to, is this the end of the battle, or do you carry on your mission?
Of course it's not. I'm half Croatian. I have the Balkan spirit in me, and I will definitely not stop. And the group will surely appeal the decision.
So she raised there the point that you, David, also raised. But is the European Parliament really any worse than other governments around the world?
Well, let's just consider how crazy this is. If I take an MEP out to lunch or coffee in Brussels, I'm subject to more accountability and disclosure than the MEP is. This is very different.
Even though it's public money.
Even though it's public money. Right. I've got to tell Politico who I'm having coffee with and what they're paying for. This is the kind of thing that there is. You do have some parallels. In the United States Congress, which I've covered, Congress is not actually subject to the freedom of information laws that cover the White House and all the executive agencies. It's another example of this remarkable behavior by legislatures, by parliaments who use their ability to make laws to shield themselves from basic public disclosure. So it's not singular, it's not unique, but it is absolutely ridiculous.
And there is a warning here, of course, from what happened in Britain and the UK Parliament 10 years ago. A massive scandal. MPs were spending money on duck houses and moats and on second mortgages. And that has really undermined people's trust in politicians. So much so that you could argue it was one of the factors that led to the vote on Brexit. The people simply did not trust what politicians had to say anymore. And that is a warning shot for the European Union.
I think it's a matter of transparency and of democracy. It's taxpayers' money. People have the right to know how it is spent. But also with that transparency, we would avoid probably certain misuse of funds if they happen. When everybody is on the public scrutiny, then you would think twice before misusing your money. So that's why I think it should be absolutely obligatory for all MEPs that all this information is public, as we are calling for.
And you were saying that majority of MEPs
we voted for that.
But actually, not all MEPs support. Not all of them support this, because some MEPs support the move to allow the public, to allow the public access to their expenses. And some Germans in the EPP group are particularly against the full transparency of their allowances and expenses, because they've previously blocked measures that would mean, better accounting of expenses. So we invited several German EPP members to join us today, but they did decline. They did, however, they sent us this statement. They said today's judgment protects the citizens. Whoever approaches MEPs must be certain that the issue he or she raises is treated confidentially without MEPs being held accountable, who they paid the two coffees for. MEPs are not obliged to disclose their travel expenses, where they go, by what means, and to meet to whom. So this is a question of privacy, and it was raised by the European Court of Justice as well. But is there a point to be made here about privacy?
No, well, they don't even want to disclose their own names when doing that statement. So I think this is rather unbelievable. Well, if they want to defend that this should be kept secret, I mean, they should argue with that openly, saying who they are. I mean, for me, it's a matter. It's not a matter of privacy because we're talking about taxpayers' money. For me, it's very clear.
And I'd venture a guess some of these same German MEPs were strongly in support of accountability and disclosure by Greece when Greece was receiving EU money in order to survive its debt crisis. So come on, this is a really...
I think there is an argument to be made about, of course, there will be an increased workload, even if it is just random checks. There will be that. But you have to balance things up. Clearly, this court cases cost money. But you have to balance it up by the fact that it is incredibly important for taxpayers who work incredibly hard, who mostly earn a lot less money than MEPs, that they are at least able to find out what their MEPs are spending their money on.
I think one of the other arguments is that, doing so, putting so much attention into declaring all these expenses would take away from the time that MEPs would have to do their jobs.
But again, they've had time to fight this court case.
I mean, sorry, I kept all my receipts and I have my numbers in my website. Sure. It's not a lot of work. And we have assistants here to help us with that. I mean, this is just ridiculous.
All right. Well, we'll leave it at that. We'll change gears a little bit here because there's another story that we are watching closely today. We turn to the UK and the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, where some Brexit comments received standing ovations. And for the latest on that, I'm joined by your news UK correspondent, Vincent McAviney. Vincent, you're there in Liverpool. We heard today from the Brexit shadow minister. What did he have to say?
Well, Sir Keir Starmer, the shadow Brexit secretary, was speaking in the main hall just behind me earlier on. And for the past 2 days, he's been in a battle here to get a motion on a second referendum on Brexit. Now, the key thing was that he wanted a provision in that motion that said that one of the options for people in a second referendum would be to remain. He said everything should be on the table, and when asked himself this morning in an interview, he said he would actually vote for remain. He made it clear as well that the government would vote down, whatever the government brings, the current plan, the Chequers deal, if it came to Parliament in the next couple of weeks. But it was really the moment where he talked about the second referendum and staying in that won him plaudits from the crowd. Let's have a look.
It's right that Parliament has the first say. It's right that Parliament has the first say. But if we need to break the impasse, our options must include campaigning for a public vote, and nobody is ruling out Remain as an option. And conference. And conference.
You could see and people standing on their feet. That was an unprompted moment, and actually...
All right, thank you for that.
Well, you could see in that clip there the applause in the hall.
Sorry, Vincent McAviney there reporting in Liverpool. Yes, we did see that applause. What significance that would have on what's coming out of that Labour Party conference? I mean, not ruling out anything, including Remain. I'd put that to you. Has it really gotten, has it shifted so much politically that they're taking this gamble?
What's really interesting about this, first of all, is that was unscripted. And this shows, if we think the Conservative Party in Britain are divided on Brexit, Labour really are not far behind them. That was unscripted. Keir Starmer was not meant to say that in his speech. He did, and he got a standing ovation. Not from everyone. There's a chap on the end called Dennis Skinner, who is a very big supporter of Jeremy Corbyn, who clearly was not happy with that. As Vinny said, Keir Starmer in an interview said that he would vote Remain. Jeremy Corbyn has refused to say that in an interview. We've heard from quite a few delegates and from trade union bosses who do not want this referendum. We've heard from Keir Starmer that he thinks that Article 50 doesn't need to be extended yet. Emily Thornberry, who's the Shadow Foreign Secretary, has just said that she thinks it should be. Labour are not at all consistent on this. And it's not unsurprising why they're not, because a large number of their voters, particularly in cities, voted to Remain. A large number, particularly in the north of England, voted to leave the European Union. So this party is as divided almost as the Conservative Party. They've not wanted to talk about Brexit for a long time. Now they have, and those divisions are very clear to see. So it's not quite as simple as offering this all options
If you
were
were
open.
Theresa May, would you be really worried right now?
Theresa May, yes, I'd be really worried, not because of the Labour Party, but really worried because of the Tory Party and the problems she's had in her negotiations with the EU. I mean, this is, and I'm going to offer a slightly different take on this. This is really, really bad news for Brussels. This is not good at all. It is absolutely bad news. The indecision in the UK, the internal fight has made Brexit impossible to negotiate. The good thing for the EU about Theresa May is at least she's been consistent, saying she was for Remain, but she's the Prime Minister. It's her job to carry out the results of the referendum. She's had a hard enough time trying to do that. This is now a complete and total mess, and you can't negotiate if you're Brussels against this kind of total indecision, total division. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn, come on, this is a profile in leadership here, refusing to even say which way he'd go. I mean, what kind of a party leader is that who won't even tell the party where he'd like to lead?
I mean, Remain as a possibility. Is it really bad news for Brussels, or is it something that is even being considered?
No, I understand the logic. It can be very bad news for Brussels because you don't know who you're talking about anymore because everything is a mess. The prospect of having Remain in the future could be good news, but how realistic is this? That we don't know. But there are two things for sure that we need to keep in mind. First, half of the population voted Remain. Who defends them in the UK nowadays? Nobody, just small parties like the Greens or the Lib Dems. But that's 50% of people voted Remain. And then the second issue is, of course, a lot of people who voted for Brexit, they did not know the conditions. The conditions under which this referendum happened was totally outrageous. Nobody knew how this would end. And of course, and Boris Johnson put it very clearly the other day in one sentence, at the end of the day, Brexit means that you need to accept huge amounts of EU law, and now you cannot elaborate them, you cannot participate in their development. So this is, now they see, a lot of people see that this makes no sense at all. So of course there are problems inside both the Tory and the Labour Party, because with that, taking two things into account, that half the population voted Remain, and that the reality of Brexit is really, really a mess, something needs to happen.
But the interesting thing for those people campaigning for a second referendum is that if there was one tomorrow, or indeed in 3 months' time, actually there has not been a significant shift in public opinion.
It'll be the same result.
It is entirely possible we would get exactly the same results.
And that's why this is bad news, right? If the timing is everything. If in a certain amount of time, Theresa May's government falls, Labour wins a new national election, and whoever becomes Prime Minister declares, that's it, Brexit is off, we're going with Remain, we're going to put it to the public, but we're stopping this right now. That would be one thing, but that's not what the EU is hearing. They're hearing this at a point when it's just very difficult.
And certainly, the Brexit is a topic that the EU will be watching closely, and we will be following the Labour conference all week, of course. But right now, let's move on to tonight's Power Play, because this is coming from the French President Emmanuel Macron. Let's take a look. What do you do when you're the French president and your approval ratings are falling sharply? There's only one answer: tax cuts. As his popularity falls to a record low and economic growth slows, France's Emmanuel Macron has wrapped up a 25 billion euro package of tax cuts for his public. The tax bill for households will fall by a total of 6 billion euros. Meanwhile, levies on businesses are set to fall by 18.8 billion euros. The result? France's overall tax burden will fall to its lowest level since 2012. But Macron is walking a tightrope. The tax cuts will push up France's budget deficit towards the EU's limit and could hinder Macron's pledge to balance the budget by the end of his presidential term in 2022. So this latest move, will it help him or hurt him? What do you think?
Absolutely help him.
Help him.
There is no doubt about it. Free money as a political strategy always works. The nice thing for French voters and European citizens is that there are these deficit rules so that Macron can't do what Donald Trump and the Republicans have done in the United States, which is just give away $1.5 trillion over 10 years with no restrictions on it whatsoever. These governments are capable, if they can, of giving away magic money. In this case, it looks like it'll play well with voters, and it's within the feasible in terms of France's economy.
Because it's going to come from somewhere, and if it's going to come from welfare, if it's going to come from public spending, what do you think? Help
I'm not that sure about that, because that, of course, will have consequences in terms of spending, and French do not like that at all. So there's another side of the story, and we'll see how it happens. And also, I'm afraid with the Macron presidency, there's another issue in the medium and long term, which is that his EU agenda is completely failing. Where's the Eurozone reform that was supposed to be developed and agreed with Angela Merkel? It leads nowhere. And this, the non-reform of the Eurozone will have more effects on the French economy in the medium and long term than this.
So is it a desperate move, do you think?
Probably yes, because his rates of popularity are falling very rapidly.
I mean, it's desperate and it's not. First of all, there's no such thing as free money.
Yes, indeed.
As in, it is pensioners and those on welfare that will have to pay to a degree. Don't be wrong, the French welfare net is not about to collapse, though. Is it a desperate move? Well, I mean, it does buy into his, overall economic message, which is slightly centre of right. And we know there are going to be job cuts coming down the line to the civil service, and there are some quite difficult and painful reforms for lots of French workers. But clearly he's in a difficult bind. I mean, his popularity has fallen off the edge of a cliff. And this is an attempt to try and resuscitate it. Will it work? He reckons it will. He says, give me 2 to 3 years and the economy will pick up. But, it's pretty sluggish, the growth in France. Unemployment is stubbornly high. He might need a slight miracle.
Do you think he's more popular outside of France than he is back at home?
Depends for whom. Of course, for the pro-Europeans at a certain moment, they were very enthusiastic with him. But my question comes again, is his European agenda moving somewhere? I don't think so. And that is another big failure for Macron. His biggest failure, I would say, so far.
I think he's more well-known, not necessarily popular. And I think there is this thing about, Donald Trump's very well-known. And I think lots of Western European thinks, he's not terribly liked. I'm not entirely sure that's true. He may well not be. But Emmanuel Macron is one of those leaders that is well-known. And I think that's why people think he might be well-liked.
And I think let's not forget that French presidents, they kind of go through this trajectory, right? They go up and then they just kind of fizzle down.
But there's no question that this image he's portrayed as Mr. Europe is starting to wear thin. That there are people in Brussels who are very uneasy about Macron as a different kind of anti-establishment figure who really did away with the traditional parties in France, and we're not sure how well that's working. Now, short term, I still think people care more about the reform they see in their own bank accounts than the Eurozone reform coming down the line. But longer term, there is no free money. It will impact government spending. And you can see Macron's bromance with Donald Trump is over. It seems his romance with the voters of France is over. Where does he go from here? It's a good question.
Just firm handshakes from now on.
Exactly. All right. Thank you for that to all our panelists. We have a lot more coming on Raw Politics tonight. Media regulation. Why the European Justice Chief is calling for tighter controls amid rising nationalism. Plus, it's a first for Sweden and its Prime Minister, Stefan Löfven. He's ousted in a vote of no confidence. We look at what's at stake and what it means for the country's political future. All of that more coming up. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, EU Justice Chief Vera Jourova used a speech in Vienna today to talk about European nationalism. Well, she said racial abuse and discrimination are on the rise, and she blamed, in part, the media and hinted at what she called smart regulation of the media. And I spoke to Vera Jourova a short time ago and asked her why she blames the media.
No, I didn't blame media for anything. I called on the bigger responsibility for all of us, of the politicians, of the media, of the opinion leaders, because we see that the atmosphere in the society is worsening, and we have to address this.
Yeah, so how do you intend to address it? What is your solution? You were talking about regulation. What does that mean?
Well, I spoke about the regulation in very general terms because I spoke about the regulation which we have in the European Union. I spoke about the Charter of Fundamental Rights. I spoke about the legislation which is
But when it comes to the media?
Well, I didn't speak about any concrete regulation. I spoke about the need of more responsibility. I mentioned the audiovisual directive, which is already in force, and I spoke about the support of high-quality media. So I think it's a misinterpretation of what I said. I didn't speak about regulation of media. I spoke vice versa about the need to respect the freedom of expression.
Okay, but you were saying that because newspapers like The Sun, for example, which you brought up, if it's freedom of expression, why did you have to comment on what they were putting out, for example?
No, I spoke about the cases when there are comments targeted on concrete people, which might incite following, attacking, and I think that to call somebody dirty rats, it's to my taste, it's going too far. But again, I am not speaking about regulation. It's the responsibility of every media, and we have to be more careful about the consequences, all of us, including the politicians.
Yeah, don't you think people are smart enough to decide for themselves? Do you think that they are easily misled, or they believe everything they read, that there needs to be guidance from, from yourself or other politicians?
No, not at all. I am the last one who would like to give guidance to people what to think. I am here to protect the freedom of expression and freedom as such. So this is my steady position, and my speech today was full of it.
All right, so okay, once and for all, to answer the question, who is responsible, in your opinion, for the rise of nationalism and divisive rhetoric?
I think this is shared competence of us, politicians, of the opinion leaders from all different spheres, of course also of the media, of the silent majority, because when the people see that somebody is under attack, maybe they should also raise voice. There are a lot of opportunities in social media to cultivate the space. But this is nothing which should be ordered by regulation, and I have to emphasize it once again. I didn't mean it like that.
All right. Thank you very much for your time, Ms. Jourova. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, with me in the studio to talk about the media's role in rising populism, we have our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, still with us, Politico's chief Brussels correspondent, David Hirschenhorn, and Socialist MEP Kathleen Van Brent. All right, I'll put it to you guys, what Ms. Jourova was saying, media responsibility. How much weight do you put on the media?
Do you want me to put a figure on that?
No, responsibility.
No. Absolutely. I think if you look, and there Mrs. Jourova is absolutely right, within the European Union we are facing a huge threat by extremism, extreme right, populism, that will attack, and that has the intention to attack democracy in European Union as such. So that is, of course, a threat, and in that it's the responsibility of politicians, of media, but also NGOs and others to defend democracy. Where I do not agree with Mrs. Jourova, I don't know what her intentions were, was to sort of try to regulate the media. What we need in Europe is a big diversity on media and a lot of different opinions and a lot of diversity. If you look to the problems in Hungary, the problem there is that the media is attacked by politicians, and it's.
Yeah, but where do you draw the line?
Is it the responsibility of the media to defend democracy?
No,
of course it is.
No,
Yeah,
it's our responsibility to defend the truth, because we can't defend a particular type of democracy or not.
No,
Viktor Orban believes he's running a democracy. It's not our place to defend that type of illiberal democracy any more than it is our place to defend the liberal democracy that Emmanuel Macron believes he stands for in France. Our job is to defend the truth. Now here, Vera Jourova was saying something. Well, actually, she was afraid to come out and say it. What she wanted to say was that most of the UK press, in her mind and in the mind of many people in Brussels, was a carrier of Brexiteer propaganda, lies that led to the Leave campaign, partly contributed to the Leave campaign winning that referendum. So there is some anger and bitterness there to what she and others in Brussels believe were falsehoods carried by the UK press. That's what she was bashing back against. She doesn't want to come out and say that because that's a much more controversial thing, especially now when Brexit is a fight.
Okay, can I come back to that, because that's interesting. In a democracy, the media has a crucial role to play, and in that sense, it is absolutely crucial. That was my key point, that you have big diversity. You have different media, you have newspapers, and that there is no concentration or only one sort of media.
Yeah.
And there's a rising problem in Hungary, for instance,
but also
in Turkey, but also in the UK, where there are big concerns of media, that there is a monopoly, a growing monopoly, and you can agree or disagree with Mr. Murdoch and his empire, but Mr. Murdoch was in favor of the Brexit, and he had a huge impact on the media in the UK, so you cannot deny that.
Right, but
And
the
there is
problem
this
was
very
not being in
problem-
support of Brexit. The problem was lying in support of Brexit. This is why I say our job is to defend the truth, because
let
there's
me
just
bring up
not one
some
type of democracy.
But also, no,
Okay,
all sorts of democracies. But I think
I want to bring up. We were talking about the UK media. So
Right.
before we get into that debate, I want to bring up the Sun cover that Ms. Jourova was referring to in her speech. It was, I think they say rats. Can we bring up that graphic?
You
there
dirty
you go.
rats.
You dirty rats. There you go. So that is the.
And also called them two-bit mobsters.
So do you think this is too much? This is too much. This has gone too far, and.
It's actually the headline on an opinion column, as I understand.
Okay.
And as an opinion, they can have whatever opinion they'd like. It is rather dramatic.
Should
One
that
might
be
say
regulated?
overly dramatic to say that they're two-bit mobsters or dirty rats for restating an EU position in Brexit that hasn't changed for a year and a half. But no, we know that there's no regulation needed for the press in that case.
Sure.
The Sun's got to make its decision about how responsible or irresponsible to be on its
And that
front
front
page.
page was followed a day later by, I think, Theresa May sticking two fingers up on the cliffs of Dover at the rest of Europe. Now, is that in search of what David says, the search for truth? No, it's clearly not. Is it provocative? Yes, it is. Is it there fundamentally to sell newspapers and to make money? Yes, it is. But because we live in a free democracy world, it doesn't have to defend democracy, but because we live in it, the Sun is also perfectly entitled, as long as it doesn't break any laws, is perfectly entitled to print what it wants. And the big question this comes down to is, has the media got some form of responsibility about trying not to promote extremism? Yes, I think we can all accept it does.
Sure.
However, we also have to accept, and politicians have that responsibility as well, but we also have to say that people are not idiots. And I think there is this common thing about, yes, we live in a democracy. And in part, by living in a democracy, we trust people to make decisions.
Reflecting society
but then we
as well?
don't, because we think, some politicians think, or would like us to make us think, that those people are then so easily led down a path. You can't have it both ways. You can't say, we trust people to make a decision, and then say, well, also, we've got a responsibility to make sure they're not misled in a certain direction.
Okay. Very quickly, where do you draw the line? Because, taking out incitement to hatred and all the extremism, but there are opinions that maybe some people don't agree with that make it to the media. Is it a reflection of society, or do you think that is pushing an agenda that you don't like, or
No. Let me be very clear on that. Of course, that's not my opinion. I hate
it's
Brexit.
chicken and egg.
I will absolutely miss all the UK people here in the Parliament and in Brussels. So I hate that. But it's absolutely a part of democracy and a freedom of speech to be a Brexiteer and to use all sorts of arguments. But something else is the wording you use and the respect. I think there is a line to draw, but it's up to the newspapers to draw that line. The line that we drew as politicians is, for instance, we have anti-discrimination and anti-racist laws. The moment you table racistic speech, then you are offending the law. So there's the line.
I will tell you, if the EU wants to improve the quality of journalism by mandating higher pay for journalists, we're prepared to get behind it. Other than that, let's keep the regulation out of the
But
news.
let's also agree that if there is no democracy, there's no freedom of press. And in that sense, I do still think that the press should defend democracy.
All right. There's one man, though, that we know who always talks about fake news and the fake media. Let's move on to U.S. President Trump, because he held a news conference at the UN yesterday. Didn't quite go to plan. That's today's edition of Say That Again.
Newly elected President Duque, Colombia, campaigned on an anti-drug platform and won. We look forward to partnering with his new administration to eradicate cocoa production in his country.
So clearly he meant cocaine. Speaking of the media, are we picking on Donald Trump too much?
I think we do, yeah.
Do you think we do?
I think we give him too much attention and too much credit. If you go to the United States, you still see a lot of people thinking in a different way. Let's take climate. It's one of my issues here in the Parliament, the Paris Agreement and climate change. He pulled out, but I still see a lot of states, a lot of NGOs, a lot of people day to day working in favor of combating climate. So yes, I think we give him too much credit and too much attention.
Or do we pick on him?
Well, we can't say we pick on him. He is the President of the United States. He is in many ways the most powerful man in the world.
Wow,
We can't pick on him too much. But does he create so much material it's impossible to ignore him on an almost daily basis?
I mean, give him credit.
Yes, it is.
He's prepared to become the worldwide leader to eradicate the scourge of chocolate. You know, we should all get behind him and cheer him on as he goes after Colombian cocoa.
That is a drug in itself.
That is a drug, indeed.
It is a drug, and it really will pick a fight here in Brussels.
And no one will pick a fight on that. All right, thank you to our panelists for that. And we have a lot more coming for you on Raw Politics. Sweden first. The PM is ousted in a no-confidence vote weeks after the far right became the third biggest party. That's after a short break. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, Sweden is falling further into political limbo tonight. Its leader, Stefan Löfven, is the first prime minister there to be dismissed following a no-confidence vote. Now, Löfven looked despondent as hopes of forming a government faded. Sweden was left with a hung parliament after inconclusive elections earlier this month. Over half of MPs voted to get rid of Löfven, including the far-right Sweden Democrats, and now the third largest party. The vote further divides parties who are already struggling to form alliances. And I am back with our panelists, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor at Euronews, David Hirschenhorn from Politico, and Kathleen Van Bremt from the Party of European Socialists. Now, I want to read first a quote by Jimmy Åkesson. He is the head of the Sweden Democrats. He said, "We will do everything in our power to stop any attempt to form a government, do everything to bring down every government which does not give us a reasonable influence in proportion to our electoral support." That's Jimmy Åkesson. I'd like to ask, do they really hold the cards? Do they think they do? Or is it, do they?
Well, it's up to the others to make sure that he doesn't hold the cards. They're the third party, and that counts for something, of course. But the Social Democrats, the moderate party, they're still big enough to form a majority. So they're not used to it. They're much more used to a right-wing, a left-wing government. So it's not easy to form a government that's a little bit in between, but it's up to them to make sure that they don't give the cards to the extreme right. Because your quote is so accurate. It doesn't only count for the Swedish extremists, but for most of the extremists, if not all extremists in Europe. They are there to make sure that there is no compromise possible, that there's no solution possible. And they're all breed on the migration politics in the sense that they put it on the top of the agenda. You cannot blame them for that. It is a problem. But in center politics, whether you're on the left or the right, in center politics, we try to find solutions. That's not their aim. They don't want to find any solutions. They just want to be at the extreme but they are to boycott everything.
Well, they are the third biggest party now in Sweden. And I mean, he will this threat, it's a threat, will this make other parties want to work with him or just further isolate him, do you think? I put that to you, David.
Well, the moderates have already given him the cards, right? At least in this vote. I mean, it's quite dramatic, and they do hold the cards. They did, in this vote. And the question now becomes: is the moderate party able to use this to leverage a better deal with the Social Democrats, or will they end up empowering the far right even further, and then having a lot to explain to folks in Brussels who wonder why have they engaged in this kind of a game? But we're seeing more and more of these coalition governments forming with parties that would previously been seen as extremist and out of the realm of ever doing business with, now being part of the government.
As you say,
I think the Speaker's now got, 4 more attempts to try and get a government to form, or else we have to look at another election in Sweden, I think, within 3 months. Now, that's unlikely, I think, given the fact that votes are not likely to change. We'll probably get the same makeup. But it is this constant reminder that, in some ways, almost consensual politics, bizarrely, is also on the rise as extremism is, because parties that would never have thought about forming coalitions together or getting into bed together politically are having to do so.
Or should they be? Because you were talking about compromise. Should they be considering, rather than pushing them to the fringes, should they be considering working?
Who?
With parties, the centrist parties.
With each other.
So you don't think they should ever work with a party?
Well, I would never do that. As a social democrat, I would never do that. But I see more right-wing parties doing that. Look at Austria.
Because you're talking about compromise.
Yeah. Yeah, but it works in Austria, for instance. It's not my politics, but they try to get them into the bed, to compromise them. But I have to say, I'm from Belgium, and in Belgium, yes, we're very much used to that.
Used to staying
extreme right is part of party politics in Belgium for more than 20 years. Well, the Flemish part of Belgium, in any case. So, and today, the more moderate but still a nationalistic party, which is the N-VA, is within the government, and it's not as if they're dividing the country much more. So it has a lot of risks as well. Instead of uniting people, instead of trying to get to a consensus, they polarize much more. So it is a threat to the society as a whole.
All right, thank you for that. Because from Sweden now, let's move to New York to have our raw moment of the evening, because it's all about a new mother bringing her baby to work. Only this mom, she's a world leader. It was a big day for New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern as she made her debut speech at the United Nations. But it was also a big day for a 3-month-old daughter who joined her mother for the diplomatic mission. And when she took to the stage, her partner held a 3-month-old baby on his lap. The question is, was the 3-month-old the biggest baby appearing at the UN this year? Was the biggest baby. Now, should we actually be seeing more of this kind of images?
Absolutely.
Of bringing your children to work?
When I was pregnant, I was a minister as well, and I did it. Well, I was not a world leader. I was just a minister. Don't get me wrong. But I think it's very important that as a woman, you can also be a mother on stage.
It's such a nice image to see in it. All right, thank you very much to our panelists, and thank you for joining us on Raw Politics. Tell us what you're thinking and talking about. I'm at Twitter, Tesa, Arcilla, or Euronews, and use the hashtag Raw Politics. Have a good evening.